A massive thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Click the link in the description to get 2 free months of premium membership and explore your creativity. It's funny how media trends work sometimes. If you had told people back when the original Witcher released that this obscure, janky, PC-only RPG based on a series of Polish fantasy novels would blossom into one of the most well-known, beloved entertainment franchises currently going, I imagine most people would have laughed in your face. Fast forward to 2020, and we now see massive billboards advertising the series' Netflix adaptation, featuring that guy what played Superman and looking set to become the most viewed debut series on the world's largest streaming platform, as well as inspiring record player numbers of a 5-year-old game on Steam. Its developer, CD Projekt Red, has gone from obscure indie to one of the industry's most talked about names. I struggle to think of a game as hotly anticipated as Cyberpunk, with confidence in this ambitious project due in no small part to their proven ability to deliver something of that scale in The Witcher 3, itself one of the defining games of the last decade, a high watermark of the medium even. The Witcher, against all odds, is mainstream now. But what if I was to tell you that there exists a game within this venerated franchise that has gone almost entirely overlooked? A supposedly massive, narrative-heavy, single-player RPG set within the Witcher universe with multiple different endings, depending on moral choices you make during your 30 hours of gameplay that I'm willing to bet even a good deal of the Witcher fans among you haven't played. Well, this seems to have been the fate of Thronebreaker: The Witcher Tales. Not some throwaway title released in the early days of the series' obscurity, this was put out not 2 years ago. It had a pretty big campaign behind it. They even flew this dafty out to Poland in order to preview it, along with a bunch of press and influencers, where the game was proudly touted in exactly the way I described. And yet, outside of a couple of reviews and several GOG emails desperately informing me of its perpetually discounted state, I've seen next to nothing about this game since its release. CD Projekt has stated that it failed to meet their sales expectations, and barely anyone I know has touched it. But what even is Thronebreaker, and why did it get such a cold reception despite riding on The Witcher's coattails? Well, I figured that with The Witcher brought back into our collective focus, it might be interesting to have a look at these questions, and finally see, after over a year of this game taunting me from my GOG library, if it lives up to the lofty claims put forward by its developer. That is, after I take a minute to talk about this video's sponsor, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community for creatives, where millions come together to take the next step in their creative journey. It's 2020, a new year, a new decade, which means it's time to stick to those resolutions. This year, why not explore new skills, deepen existing passions, and get lost in creativity with Skillshare's online classes, on topics including illustration, design, photography, video, freelancing, and more. With so much to explore, real projects to create, and the support of fellow creatives, Skillshare empowers you to accomplish real growth. Got an idea for your own fantasy-inspired story or world you think can take on The Witcher? Why not get writing with Daniel Jose Older's class entitled Storytelling 101, Character, Conflict, Context, and Craft? A super approachable series from a New York Times best-selling author that not only encourages newcomers to find their narrative voice, but can also be useful to veteran writers looking for some inspiration. What's more, Skillshare offers classes designed for real life that can fit your busy routine. It's way more affordable than pricey in-person classes or workshops. An annual subscription is less than $10 a month. And because Skillshare is sponsoring this video, you can join with my link in the description and get a 2-month free trial, so there's no risk to checking it out for yourself. And you'll be helping the channel in the process. Thanks again to Skillshare for sponsoring the video, and now back to Thronebreaker: The Witcher Tales. As for what Thronebreaker is, we have to contextualize its origins a little. This is not what you might have in your head when you picture Witcher game. More accurately, it's a story campaign focused around Battles of Gwent, the card-based minigame first found in The Witcher 3 and expanded into its own release in 2018 thanks to its wild popularity. Wild to me at least, because I've never viewed the idea of standalone Gwent as particularly compelling. Even putting to the side the fact that I've never been much of a card game guy, when I first heard CD Projekt was turning it into its own competitive multiplayer game, I found myself wondering, how would that even work? See, as played in The Witcher 3, Gwent is little more than a numbers game, one of brute force as opposed to particularly careful strategy. Draw out as many of the opponent's cards as possible by playing your weakest units, wait until they pass, get just above their number to win the round, then proceed to bulldoze them in the next with the stronger units you still have left. If you lose, just keep banging your head against that wall until you get a better draw at the start. Rinse and repeat. It's simple, fast fun for sure. I enjoyed it. If nothing else, it quickly sated that primal urge to get a bigger number than the other guy, inspiring a collect-em-all mentality that saw me spending a whole bunch of time wandering about specifically to gain new cards that would, in turn, make dominating foes even easier as you built the monster or Nilfgaard decks. Hardly the epitome of deft, balanced design. 2018's Gwent, on the other hand, which I actually played mainly during the 2017 open beta, with its drastic rule changes and completely overhauled graphics and animations, failed to grab me for almost the opposite reason. Here, a newfound emphasis on strategy, while necessary, saw real-life human opponents take forever to decide their next move, which didn't exactly gel with the compulsive, rapid-fire action of throwing numbers at a computer and having them instantly spit back at you. Long story short, when I heard that Thronebreaker would be attaching a single-player story to this odd, often awkward card game, needless to say I wasn't exactly chomping at the bit to get my hands on it. Curiosity got the better of me though, when elements of its presentation started to pique my interest. At the aforementioned preview event, the game's director excitedly unveiled not one, not two, but 5 intricately illustrated maps to detail the scale of the fully explorable environments players traverse here. You heard me right, exploration. Card battles merely dot this seemingly large, cel-shaded world, sandwiched by conversations between rich, fully voiced characters that see you making decisions about how your particular story is going to go down. There's even an easy mode should you want to just skip every battle just to experience the tale woven by the guy who wrote The Witcher 3's most celebrated quests. It might seem then that the card battles themselves play less of a role in this quote-unquote Gwent with a story experience than you might think. That said, after playing it to completion, I can tell you that for multiple reasons, both good and bad, things are slightly more complicated than that. This becomes clear as you realise that however beautiful the drawn maps actually are, the scale and variety they suggest is overstated, existing mainly as a series of samey, squiggly paths that you follow from one end to the other, their diminutive nature rendering the many fast travel points you come across practically meaningless. Going off the beaten path means you'll get to play more Gwent of course, but other than that, you'll see variations on the same vista shot time and time again. You'll endlessly right-click on random piles of wood to expand your camp, which functions as little more than a deck building screen. You'll have one-sided conversations with NPCs, you'll click through the occasional text box. Your reward for solving the puzzle of sussing out a treasure location from a hand-drawn map, a potentially really neat feature, is cards and avatars for multiplayer Gwent. All of this is to say that if you're looking for tens of hours getting lost in a huge open world, this game will disappoint you. Indeed, the reason the developers can get away with calling Thronebreaker a lengthy, multi-hour campaign then, is because the vast majority of that playtime will be spent in the game's card battles, repeating them again and again until you can finally get the slip on your opponent and find the winning strategy. Because the version of Gwent found in Thronebreaker is pretty different to even the one found in 2018's game, let alone The Witcher 3, and honestly, I love it. It goes even further with 2018's rule changes, making for a far more refined, fast-paced, dynamic, and tactical affair. In any given battle, for example, I could place my Arbalest and have it damage an enemy, or I could wait, place Wagenburg, which I can order to damage an entire row based on how much armor it has, gaining 1 armor for every unit I place on its row, then place my Scytheman down, both drawing out further enemy cards so I have a better idea of my opponent's strategy, then, in the space of 1 turn, place my Arbalest, do the damage, then use Meave's leadership abilities to damage an enemy by 4 after deciding, of course, if eliminating 1 card will have a knock-on effect on other enemy cards, or whether I'm better off keeping the row full of low strength cards so they can't place any more on that row, which will subsequently trigger my Scytheman and Arbalest's loyal abilities, boosting the former and causing the latter to fire another shot, then use Wagenburg to damage the entire row. Oh, and all this comes with the risk that your opponent is likely damaging your cards the entire time too. Whew. In short, boosting, subtracting, or outright eliminating individual cards becomes a much more important moment-to-moment consideration than basic weather effects or simply throwing numbers at the bigger number at the site. You're far more concerned with staying multiple moves ahead of your enemy, and combined with the fact that it's a CPU-controlled opponent rather than a real-life flesh bag humming and hawing about which card to counter yours with, battles have a snappiness to them that I found sorely lacking in the multiplayer component. And what's more, these battles have variety. One of this game's best features is its newly introduced puzzle fights. As first encountered upon stumbling into a rock slide and finding myself in a battle against the rocks, these puzzles cleverly recontextualize in-world events into card duels themselves, providing you with specific decks, each with their own rules, to perform actions like taking on a dwarf in a drinking competition, or escaping a troll's cave by essentially preparing soup for it, or even performing a daring heist. Thronebreaker is able to create scenarios as diverse as stealth missions here. It's these kinds of encounters that often saw me scratching my head, constantly retrying bouts, absolutely perplexed as to the one move I was missing in this elaborate web the developers had planned out. Outside of the main story battles, which have to allow for pretty much anyone to succeed, Thronebreaker can be pretty goddamn difficult at times. It's actually rare to find a full game of 2-round Gwent here, with a focus on intensifying competition, resulting in many shortened battles, completely obliterating the tactics I relied on in The Witcher 3. This is about using every card in your hand in one round, placing them in the exact right order to maximise their effects across any one turn. Every move counts here, and as a result, battles are honestly more tense than The Witcher's often floaty combat. Hitting pass can lead to a nail-biting finale as the computer tries to figure out a way to outnumber you, and when that moment doesn't come, there's an exhilaration I never thought I'd get out of a card game. So yeah, once you get a grasp on the workings of all your different cards, Thronebreaker is probably the most fun you could have with Gwent. Unfortunately though, it also got me thinking about why anyone would pick that story mode difficulty. Not just because it skips the game part of this video game, but just like the scale of the world and the length of the campaign might have been overstated by CD Projekt Red, that much talked about narrative driving this whole thing ain't exactly up to much, feeling decidedly basic compared to the series it spins off from. Ultimately, Thronebreaker is the story of a caravan. Serving as a prequel to the Witcher games, Queen Meve of Lyria and Rivia is betrayed by her court in the face of Nilfgaardian invasion and must battle across this world in order to build an army and get her vengeance. And that's kind of it. Along her travels, she faces some further betrayal, she might stumble into the occasional encounter that shows her how this war is affecting her subjects, but it may be more accurate to say that she stumbles past them. You read some very well voiced, very evocative text, play some cards, and then move on. The game's story, the way it's structured, is markedly less concerned with taking its time and allowing you to ruminate on individual problems than prior Witcher titles, than it is with Meve achieving her main goal of toppling Nilfgaard, leaving me feeling that this monarch is a bit of a wasted character. It's mainly a problem of relatability, however. While it might seem unfair to compare the two, Meve's priorities are just not as compelling as Geralt's. See, one of the great triumphs of The Witcher storytelling to me was that Geralt was written to be pretty dispassionate about the larger conflict ravaging the world. His concerns involved getting paid and surviving, making sure those he cared about were alright, dealing with discrimination and sometimes loss. Crucially, the same as the other citizens in this world. He was grounded. If you could pay him, you would get Geralt's attention no matter your social standing. Regardless of how cold he could sometimes be in this regard, his willingness to hear out the problems of the lower classes, to take time out to help them in an otherwise brutal world, made him likeable. Meve, on the other hand, while she might not be as caught up in the pomposity of royalty as other rulers, she's still a ruler, the kind of person Geralt would deal with only if he had a personal stake in the matter. The betrayal at the end of Chapter 2, however surprising, follows several slow hours of Meve just being a monarch. You know, we root for underdogs in stories for a reason. Even beyond that point though, her arc of learning to work with those on different rungs of society fades into the background in favour of royal vengeance and quelling dissent from those beneath her at almost any cost, swiftly ruling on any individual problem she comes across and moving on. Side quests, content that in prior Witcher titles would unfurl into these multi-layered missions, are often relegated to single text boxes, so meaningless in the grand scheme of things that I barely pay attention to them after a while, instead mindlessly clicking on whichever option would boost soldier morale and heading on my way. For me, the central plotlines of the main Witcher games were nowhere near as memorable as the characters I got to know along the way, the time I spent with them, the locations, those worlds that remain so vivid in my memory. Here, the opposite is true. The main mission is the focus. Build your army, get it to the other end of the map. But even then, knowing that Thronebreaker's story is nowhere near as well structured or paced as The Witcher, I can't say I felt nothing when that betrayal happened. or the multiple betrayals that came after it. The moral choices might not have meant much in terms of the main narrative, the multiple endings are nowhere near as unique as they were made out to be, but there were a good few moments in there that had me sweating over my decision nonetheless. And all this comes down to one thing: how those events affected my deck. Let me explain. Chapter 2's betrayal stings not because of these characters you barely know despite spending hours with them, but because of the montage of screens informing you that the cards you've relied on for hours are no longer in your deck. It's tense having to think of new strategies on the fly, considering the abilities of factions you'd previously had no experience with. Those moral choices make it pretty clear what the right decision is, but that decision would also mean either giving up a really good card, living in the knowledge that something bad would happen to another good card down the line, or gravely sacrificing soldier morale, with the effects this has on unit strength sometimes making all the difference in a tough fight. These choices are directly linked to your gameplay. You're forced to make the game concretely more difficult for yourself, weaken your deck, in order to do the right thing. As a result, the deck building really feels like you're gathering up a ragtag army, one that's yours, that you grow attached to, enduring everything together, even if, mechanically, you're just dragging Meve across these repetitive landscapes. The cards and the battles you enter with them are the story here, and part of me thinks this is the reason Thronebreaker has struggled to find its audience. See, in the marketing for Thronebreaker, the vibe I got at that original preview event in 2018 was that CD Projekt Red were really trying to emphasise the Witcherness of this whole thing. It's got a long campaign with a big open world and an engaging story, just like The Witcher, with the assumed follow-on from that being that it isn't just Gwent. And indeed, it certainly wasn't the card battles that initially drew me to this thing. But when examined in that light, compared to its supposed predecessors, Thronebreaker's story is poorly paced, its environments unmemorable, the scope of exploration drastically limited. Thronebreaker is a disappointing Witcher game. When taken on its own merits though, Thronebreaker sees CD Projekt Red perfect the balance and strategy of a card game that at one point had very little of either, while maintaining the speed and intensity of play that made the original so addictive regardless. They created ridiculously varied scenarios, using the same cards and arenas you'd use for normal battles, and what's more, they used those cards to tell a more interesting, morally affecting story than anything the main narrative could hope to convey through text. And with that in mind, I would highly recommend checking out Thronebreaker if you get the chance. I'd welcome further experiments with single-player Gwent. It's just that what I'd be looking for out of that is very different to what I would want from another Witcher game. So I hope you enjoyed my piece on Thronebreaker. Once again, a massive thank you to this video's sponsor Skillshare, and a reminder that you can join with 2 months of free premium membership by clicking the link in the description. I'd also like to sincerely thank my patrons. I say it a lot, but you guys keep this channel going. YouTube isn't exactly making things easy for its creators out here. This simply would not be possible without your generous support. If you'd like access to exclusive rewards, as well as the knowledge you're directly helping me make the videos I want to make, $1 or $2 pledge to patreon.com/writingongames helps more than you can possibly know. Thank you so much. Special thanks go to Mark B. Writing, Martin Brosat, Artyom Vitsyuk, Rob, Tommy Carver-Chaplin, Lucas, Shardfire, Bryce Snyder, Dallas Keen, Henry Milek, Konstantinos Sakinis, my dad, Anna Pimentel, Hebe Amori, The Nameless Guy, Justin's Holderness, David Björk, Jesse Ryan, William Fielder, Leah Chinello, Edward Clayton Andrews, Samuel Pickens, Ham Megas, Timothy Jones, and Charlie Yang. And with that, this has been another episode of Writing on Games. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.